would be impossible for most of us without the invention of the various modes of transport seen throughout our society. Whether it's taking the train to school, driving to work, or flying on a much-needed vacation, we all use different modes of transport to get us where we need to be. However, a question needs to be asked. Do these terrifically convenient modes of transport come at a cost? What are the impacts on ourselves, our local environment, and the planet as a whole? Are some modes of transport better than others, and if so, in what regards? Let's see what scientists have found so far on the topic. First, let's go over some of the history of how transportation vehicles developed over the years.
We've come a long way since Carl Benz and Gottlieb Daimler filed their patents for their first successful gasoline-powered automobiles in 1886. Since then, we've seen a large variety of gasoline-powered cars, but the first rapid increase in automobiles was seen in America in 1913 to 1927, with the Ford Motor Company building 14 million Model Ts and putting them on the market. Since then, we've seen our landscapes shift towards ones where automobile transport was imperative to the architecture. For example, the city of Los Angeles has dedicated 1/3 of its land use to paved roads for automobiles. Gasoline-powered transit continued to be encouraged for decades, with the U.S. beginning the construction of the Interstate Highway in 1956 and Canada opening the Trans-Canada Highway in 1962.
The Clean Air Act of 1970 was one of the first emission regulations in North America, implemented by the United States, designed to limit the production of pollutants by new vehicles. Emission standards in Canada were introduced in 1988 for cars and trucks, designed to be in line with standards which had already been in use by the United States. For heavy-duty trucks, similar standards were put in place from 1988 to 1994.
A term most of us associate with climate change is the dreaded greenhouse gases, gases that trap the heat within our atmosphere, causing a global increase in temperature. But did you know that a large portion of greenhouse gas emissions are caused by urban transport? According to one study, out of the 15 million tons of carbon dioxide, perhaps the most notorious greenhouse gas, emitted into the atmosphere in Beijing in the year 2012, 75.5% was from cars and 17.3% from buses. That's a major influence from the transportation industry.
Not only does transportation constitute a large portion of greenhouse gas emissions, but it can also impact the health of humans. For example, concentrations of acetylene emitted by automobiles has been shown to increase stroke mortality. Sleep quality can also decrease due to the loudness of aircraft, rail, and road traffic noise. Even childhood obesity or body mass index has been shown to be positively associated with traffic pollution. One study found that children who lived in the top 10% of high air pollution areas had a 13.6 increase in BMI when compared to the average.
Transportation pollution can also affect the local environment. In the study by Wang, pollution due to traffic caused heavy metals to become deposited through dry deposition and road runoff, which can impact water quality in the surrounding area.
So now it's clear that there are some serious effects to the modes of transportation we use daily. However, most people won't be inclined to give up their vehicles completely. So it begs the question, which modes of transport are the worst and which ones are the better? As transportation is a non-point source of emissions, tracing the emissions created by the whole sector to individual vehicles can be challenging. However, data from the European Environment Agency provides insight into how different vehicles fare comparatively. In measurements taken from 2000, 2007, and 2014, passenger cars produced the most CO2 per ton kilometer when compared to two-wheelers and buses and coaches.
The International Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, also provides some data on the carbon emissions of different passenger transport vehicles. They state that the amount of carbon dioxide emitted per passenger kilometer differs widely based on the type of vehicle within the category. However, typical carbon dioxide emissions can be given. Air, car, and truck transport range between 30 to 110 grams of carbon dioxide per passenger kilometer. The carbon dioxide emissions from bus or coach transport is lower at less than 20 grams per kilometer. Emissions from rail travel can be significantly lower at less than 5 grams, or as high as 50 grams per passenger kilometer.
Yeah,
so far points to the fact that driving around your car, as convenient as it may not be the most efficient in terms of emissions. So, what other modes of transport are there?
Many governments have taken the initiative to implement new and more efficient forms of passenger transit. They have also done research to investigate the costs and benefits of these new systems. These studies are usually done in extremely highly populated cities, where more efficient travel would cause the greatest impact.
More traditional services such as bus routes can drastically reduce CO2 production, as shown in Beijing, where car and taxi trips cost 5 times more emissions than similar bus trips. However, traditional buses can still produce a fair amount of emissions. Therefore, if governments are going to encourage their citizens to choose this more eco-friendly option, they should make it as efficient as possible. A study done in 2017 examined the benefits of implementing a new greener bus rapid transit system versus the traditional normal bus transit system in Xiamen. The researchers found that the new bus rapid transit system had a much better energy and environmental performance because it was less affected by traffic, had higher vehicle occupancy, and was suitable for large distance transportation. Also, the fact that the transit system was more attractive to citizens would lead more individuals to abandon their personal modes of transit for this public option.
Also, a study done in 2016 looked at the energy use and emissions that could be avoided by using a new Line 4 train instead of other forms of transit in Rio de Janeiro. The study, which worked within the time frame of 2016 to 2040, revealed that there would be a 55,449 tons per year, or 44.53 grams per passenger kilometer reduction in CO2. The energy avoided would be 0.76 megajoules per passenger kilometer. Several factors went into these results: the electricity matrix, the system's passenger load, and the level of alternative fuel were used, replacing the traditional fuels of the other transit systems.
Although fancy new systems like the one in Xiamen sound appealing, they may not be in the cards for some municipalities due to these systems being economically costly. Another, more frugal option is to increase the availability of mass transit options, such as the system currently implemented in Edmonton, the light rail system. Not only are these systems more efficient in moving large amounts of people with low emissions, but they are also able to improve overall health through reduced nighttime noise and increased physical activity levels due to more walking. This can result in important additional benefits, such as a drastically reduced stroke mortality rate.
Now you may be thinking, all of these options sound great, but I'm not an engineer or a city planner, and changes in legislation take time. What am I supposed to do to change the transit emissions for my city? Other than using the resources your city provides in terms of public transit, we've outlined a few individual alternatives.
The first alternative is one that abandons the use of combustion-powered vehicles, the humble bicycle. Not only are bicycles better for the environment due to a lack of emissions, they are also healthier for the commuters, as shown in a research study where cycle use improved both air quality and cardiovascular health.
A similar and faster alternative, the electrically powered bike, represents a balance between the power of a traditional road vehicle with the reduced form and emissions of a bicycle. These bikes have been recommended to serve as a strong option in place of cars, especially in areas with high amounts of traffic and existing infrastructure for bikes, such as bike lanes. However, the major caveat with these bikes is their reliance on lead-powered batteries, a heavy metal which is known for contributing to particulate matter as a pollutant.
Another alternative would be carpooling. Sometimes, using a vehicle is the only choice for people living in rural areas, and often, biking doesn't seem like the most appealing idea during the winter. In order to reach our projections and goals of reduced emissions, actions must be taken today. Carpooling can reduce emissions significantly and is a strong option for those without access to the options previously mentioned. According to a study done in 2009, carpooling can reduce potential emissions by 36.1 metric tons of carbon. Even though carpooling does not completely eradicate the emissions a gas vehicle produces, it gives time for the legislations and new technologies to come into effect. In the United States, there are designated lanes for carpooling. During the early morning and after work rush hours, people utilize these lanes in order to decrease their commute time. Changing the world on a global scale starts with small steps. It starts with changing everyday behaviors, and every little behavior counts.
All these alternatives sound really wonderful, but are there any downsides to switching over? A particularly interesting current line of research involves studies looking into the direct effects of these alternative methods and the potential downsides that they may pose. Research has found that while a lot of green driving methods may be effective in curbing the release of carbon dioxide and nitrogen oxide emissions, they actually resulted in increased exposure of pedestrians to air pollutants due to the fact that more people were walking. This idea is mirrored in a similar study that was able to determine that while biking was a healthier method for both ecological and cardiovascular health, it resulted in greatly increased exposure of the rider to pollutants from other vehicles. Occupants of cars are protected from these pollutants by the closed system of the vehicle, while cyclists have no method of filtering incoming air. In a similar vein to this, scientists found that hybrid electric vehicles were not able to provide a significantly lower level of carbon dioxide emissions when compared with standard small vehicles.
So alternative modes of transport have their pros and cons. However, like many issues, transit pollution is not likely going to be solved by the actions of individuals. Policy at a high level will likely be needed in order to drive the change to truly reduce emissions.
Fortunately, scientists have already started to research how this can happen. In Malaysia, it was determined that up to 652 kilotons of CO2 emissions could be prevented through the removal of fuel price subsidies. Implementation of such legislation was modeled and predicted to reduce Malaysia's CO2 production by 6.55% within 4 years. Similarly, China's recent policy changes, designed to mitigate CO2 emissions, are predicted to be able to reduce peak emissions by 15%.
You may be thinking, are precautions even being taken?
There are actually current legislations and technologies in place to reduce emissions, but they are not enough. According to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency website, there are many ways in which the United States is taking precautions. Here are a few. Vehicle manufacturers are required to display vehicle economy information and fuel cost to customers. This is to ensure that consumers are informed on the economical and environmental costs of their vehicles. Having more informed consumers may waver their decisions to other car models that would save them money. There are also acts in place to ensure low fuel emissions. The 2007 Energy Independence and Security Act states that federal agency vehicles need to produce low greenhouse gas emissions. The U.S. is also taking measures in ensuring a reduction of emissions through renewable fuels, aircraft regulations, and improving efficiency of global trade methods.
So what is the take-home message here? Due to the substantial amount of evidence of the negative environmental, human, and climate consequences of transportation pollution, especially in larger and more populous nations, reducing the effects of transportation pollution is of paramount importance for ourselves, our environment, and our planet. Traveling alone in your car is the least sustainable way for you to get from point A to point B, aside from flying that is. Try and save the car for when you really need it. Use alternative modes of transportation like public transit and cycling as much as possible, and when none of these are an option, try to carpool.
Most of all, make your voice heard and let your government know that you support more green transit infrastructure in your city. The best way to reduce transportation pollution is to implement regulations and to try to come up with more efficient transportation systems. But this can only be done if we have more government support and pressure. There must be pressure for reforms and mitigation practices in order to make this a better and healthier world to live in.
Although there are cons and setbacks regarding greener modes of transport, they are obstacles that can be overcome. With a growing population and a continuously growing infrastructure, the need for transportation will only increase. In order to care for our world of tomorrow, we must take precautions today.